eFootball version 5.2 has changed the player speed and acceleration mechanics once again. I kinda wish they didn't change it just after 4 months, because that meant I would have to redo all my tests again. And that's exactly what I did. And I'm going to show you my findings, as well as how that might affect how we build our players. So there are 3 main changes to speed and acceleration in this update. The first one, Konami said they reduced the difference in ability levels caused by players' top speed and acceleration. So this seems like a direct response to how in version 5 and 5.1, where people would just send through balls after through balls, and often defenders just wouldn't be able to catch up. So what exactly did Konami change to address this then? Well, once again, we cite the GOAT Amadeus, as he has tested player velocity between the 2 versions. From this graph, we can clearly see that velocity of speed value 90 and above remains unchanged, but Konami has slightly buffed player velocity of speed value below 90. From speed value 80 to 89, it roughly gets a buff of +1 compared to the last version, meaning if your player has 85 speed, he would have roughly the same velocity as a player with 86 speed in the last version. For speed value 7 to 79, it gets a buff of roughly +2 speed compared to the last version. It is a very slight buff without completely breaking the balance of the game. We'll see how big of an impact this is over time. The other change was to acceleration. Remember how in version 5 the acceleration zone was extended to 18 yards, making most players taking longer time to accelerate and longer distance to reach top speed? Well, it is as if Konami said, we've tried different things, but that broke the game, so they've completely scrapped it. Because with all the tests I've done, players all reach their respective top speed just outside of the 12-yard marker. If you want to know how I test this, then you can check out the last video on this topic. But yeah, this applies to acceleration range from 60 to 100, with slight discrepancies which I deem to be within a margin of error, with perhaps an exception when I tested this Van der Veen with 56 acceleration. For some reason, he reached his top speed closer to the 18-yard marker. This might be an anomaly, but I didn't bother retesting it, because frankly, if you're using a player with below 60 acceleration, you deserve to be left in the dust. But yes, practically every player has the same distance to top speed. It looks like Konami has reverted back to the 12-yard acceleration zone rule and the same transition phase across the board. This has massively reduced the importance of acceleration stat seen in version 5.0. Speaking of, a lot of people misunderstood my distance to top speed graph for version 5.0, thinking that 85 and 90 acceleration are the same, and some even coined 85 acceleration as the threshold. No doubt people are going to misunderstand this graph and say 60 and 100 acceleration are the same. Just like I had explained in the previous video, just because the distance to top speed is the same, doesn't mean the speed is the same. This comparison clearly shows that higher acceleration will complete the first 12 yards faster, and thus reaching top speed faster. This doesn't seem to have a massive effect on dribbling speed, however, though I've not done any extensive tests to confirm this. Konami said they have reduced how fast the acceleration decreases as stamina declines. Previously, when a player is in red stamina or even 0 stamina, their acceleration would receive an 18% reduction. In version 5.2, my quick tests show this is now around 12% reduction. So if you have 80 acceleration, when out of stamina, the player will have the equivalent acceleration stat of 70. Additional effects applied to player stats, defensive awareness. Konami claims that they've made adjustments so that defensive awareness will now impact acceleration levels. This is perhaps the most confusing of all. I've done multiple tests on Van der Veen and Tony Adams, but none of them had shown that an increase in defensive awareness had any noticeable impact on acceleration on manually controlled players. Amadeus' tests showed that sometimes defensive awareness does impact player acceleration, but even Amadeus is unsure as to what exactly triggers this. He hypothesizes that defensive awareness might only come into effect if the game realizes that a certain player is in the marking state. though there's no follow-up on what contributes to a player being in said marking state. I did a quick test with a scenario of manually tracking a 1-2 run, but yet again, with a practical application of a manual run, it still showed no difference when defensive awareness is increased. Even if we look at the examples from Amadeus, when defensive awareness did affect acceleration, these tests are comparing between 40 and 99 defensive awareness, almost as extreme as it can get in the game, and yet the difference is only about 8 frames after 12 yards. In real life applications where every centre-backs we use now has at least 90 defensive awareness, when people are deciding whether to bump the defensive awareness up by 3 points to 100, I really don't think defensive awareness would affect acceleration that much. Not to mention, this change of adding defensive awareness stat to the formula of player acceleration is a direct mirror of the change in version 5.0, in which attacking awareness could affect player acceleration during attacks, though it only applies to AI runs. So to me, it would make more sense if this change also only applied to AI runs only. Sadly, it is practically impossible to instruct an AI defender to stand still and perform a straight line run on command. So I've yet to devise a test to see how much defensive awareness would affect AI acceleration. But if we look up the data from Amadeus once again of how attacking awareness impacts acceleration, we can see that from attacking awareness 90 to 99, there's no increase in player acceleration. So if the current change to defensive awareness was made to mirror this, then it would be logical to expect the same applying to defensive awareness, where the effect of defensive awareness on player acceleration caps out at 90. Though at the time of making this video, this is purely speculation. There's no real data to support this claim. So what does defensive awareness do to acceleration then? While I have no real scientific evidence to show this, I'm pretty confident that it affects the acceleration speed of AI defenders. Like I said, it is pretty impossible to create identical runs with an AI defender, but I'm going to try my best to explain it with this example. We have two Tony Adamses here with the same acceleration and speed. The only difference is one has 81 defensive awareness and one has 94. Both are turning around to track a runner at full speed, lining up their first step after turning their bodies around. Remember their starting position relative to the nearest line. After 3 steps are completed, it seems like the one with 94 defensive awareness has covered slightly more distance. This effect is more pronounced when the bottom Tony Adams has completed 12 yards on running, but the one above has completed slightly less distance. Though it is important to note that by this point, the above Tony Adams started to run inwards, making this comparison not very accurate. Though in my opinion, 94 defensive awareness does have an edge, but it probably is a very slight one. Also don't forget, this is between 81 and 94 defensive awareness. Say if it was between 94 and 100 defensive awareness, the difference would probably be minimal. Another thing that I think defensive awareness affects is how fast AI defenders can react to tracking opposition players' run. Here you can see Tony Adams with 81 defensive awareness doesn't react to Mbappe's run very well, only starting to turn around when Mbappe has nearly ran past him. Another example once again shows lower defensive awareness reacting quite late, when higher defensive awareness starts to turn around way ahead of Mbappe. Even in this example, Tony Adams just completely allows Mbappe to run past him, putting him in a big disadvantage to chase the through ball. That doesn't mean though, higher defensive awareness will always be perfect, and lower awareness will always allow the runner to get past. Here's one example where the opposite happens. Lower awareness turns around quickly, while higher awareness reacts a bit late, although not as bad as the other examples with lower awareness. So what does this mean then? I think you'd have to interpret this quite similarly to how the finishing attribute works. Having 81 finishing doesn't mean you will never score a goal. Having 94 finishing doesn't mean you will score with every shot. But with 94 finishing, a player is more likely to convert more chances than with 81 finishing. In a similar way, 94 defensive awareness will react better and more often than it would with 81 defensive awareness. Not to mention the other benefits like better positioning as well. So here comes the most important part. How should we build our defenders now? Well, even with the acceleration zone reverting back to 12 yards, it is still not recommended to use or build defenders with very high speed and very low acceleration. Compared to the previous versions, yes, the acceleration is a little bit faster, but paired with a pacey player, you're still never going to catch up. Using this Saliba for example once again, is it better to use the auto build with 74 acceleration and 90 speed, or to put the points in acceleration to make it a bit more balanced? In this comparison, we actually only see the higher speed build taking the lead after around 36 yards. Having said that, both builds can comfortably catch up with a pacey dribbler like Yamal. And this is a clear example to show the effects of the changes made in version 5.2, because when the same tests were done in version 5.0, the two builds were still behind the dribbler after 36 yards. What about another fan favourite, Tony Adams? Using the auto build as a reference, which doesn't give a lot of points to play with. But is it better to put the points into speed or acceleration? Let's see the comparison. In this scenario, I'm inclined to say the auto build actually provides the most balance. Out of the other two builds, I would say the one with 77 acceleration is a bit better. Despite the importance of acceleration being reduced in this update, it still takes a while for higher speed to catch up. For the best part of 30 yards, 77 acceleration is ahead. It's only deep into the 36 yards marker where 81 speed starts to take over. Let's look at a defender who can achieve decent speed and acceleration without sacrificing important stats. With the previous emphasis on acceleration in version 5.0, I built my Nesta to have 87 acceleration and 86 speed. Without touching the points for defending and aerial, is it better to keep the same build or to have 90 speed and 85 acceleration? We actually see a similar pattern to the Tony Adams examples. For the best part of 30 yards, higher acceleration but lower speed is ahead. It's only after 36 yards that higher speed starts to take over. In any case, both builds are very capable of catching up with a speedster like Yamal. This doesn't mean though you should lump all your points into acceleration alone. We can see here the two extreme builds above still cannot outperform the more balanced builds below. So the TLDR, as always, I don't want to tell you which builds you should use, and defenders should have a certain amount of acceleration and speed. But for me, unless you plan on having your centre backs constantly running more than 36 yards, it seems like a bit of a waste to have very high speed but moderate acceleration. For the most part, there's a lot of stopping and starting in defending, in which top speed hardly kicks in and higher acceleration is better for small bursts of speed. So it is best to keep the speed and acceleration values quite balanced without going into extreme builds. For attacking fullbacks, however, it is useful to have above 90 speed, since they do very often cover more than 36 yards of distance. On top of that, putting points into speed also boosts stamina, which is equally as important for attacking fullbacks. One thing for sure you shouldn't do is to put all your points into getting the highest defensive awareness possible, thinking that higher defensive awareness equals higher acceleration. In some cases that might be true, but as we've seen before, this doesn't always kick in, and when it doesn't, you'll be punished for having lower acceleration stat, especially when you're trading 2 or 3 points in acceleration just to boost 1 point in defensive awareness. So that's it from me for this video, guys. As always, these kinds of videos take a long time to make, so I would appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Big shout outs to my channel members for supporting the channel. I'm now trialing reducing the early access period to 3 days instead of the usual 7. This is not really a great advertisement for my membership, but we'll see how it goes. Alright, thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.